Okay, we're gonna knock this out as quickly as possible. I did a Black Sabbath sort of roundup, tried to do the Ozzy albums because Ozzy Osbourne announced his retirement. But I wouldn't be a true audiophile, metalhead, musician, multi instrumentalist, composer. I wouldn't be anything pertaining to music if I didn't also include Led Zeppelin in the same stretch as Black Sabbath. I think they're the two bands that sort of round themselves out the most when it comes to hard rock and heavy metal. Obviously, Black Sabbath's far more in the heavy metal direction, and Zeppelin is far more in the hard rock direction. But really, there's a tremendous overlap, and to most people, there's ostensibly the same genre. Now, these albums are some of my favorite albums in the entire world of all time, and probably all galaxies that have music. These would still be some of the best. Maybe not. Maybe there's a galaxy out there that has unearthly music that just soars into the divine and and sears the firmament asunder. But yeah, um, I as a teenager I developed a very strong passion for commemoration of Led Zeppelin songs, the songwriting, the lyricism, right? Also the composition, the chord structure, the melodic, the harmonics and melody. Even the rhythm with Bonham is a mainstay, and obviously he's supported excellently by John Paul Jones, who really supports everyone, but he supports Bonham like sort of two peas in the pod. Anyway, so starting out, let's do Led Zeppelin 1. This isn't going to be too tough. I think S. I think Led Zeppelin 1 is like some people view the Beatles' earlier work, Revolver, Rubber Soul, let's say, Help. I think that this is sort of beats out all that. I think this Led Zeppelin 1, every track is killer. Every track has panache and punch and pizzazz. Every track sings a song that's meaningful to me. Maybe in on a somewhat demented layer level, it hits me in a way that it possibly shouldn't. But I think that the creepiness aside, the 8 or 10 or so tracks, maybe more. I don't know, but I thought 10, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 12. Good times, bad times, your time is gonna come. How many more times? A lot of songs about time, right? Dazed and Confused. Um, was it Black Country Woman or is it Front of Your Stomp? Anyway, communication breakdown, right? Oh, so many good tracks in Led Zeppelin 1. It's not my favorite album, probably, but it's probably my second favorite or third favorite. It's on the higher level. It's a S for sure. The only one that probably exceeds it for me that I can name right now is Led Zeppelin 2, which has all of the energy of Led Zeppelin 1, but has so much more passion and fieriness and storm and vim and vigor. I mean, Led Zeppelin 1, don't get me wrong, it's very cool and collected and gruff and energy and high and punchy, but it doesn't have the maelstrom sort of pyromania that Led Zeppelin 2 has. Led Zeppelin 2 really feels like Led Zeppelin 1 seems like it's almost like a blues album where he's mad, where Plant or singer Robert Plant's mad at his girlfriend and writes an album to get back at her. But Led Zeppelin 2 is almost like the album that he writes to sort of brag about his success in the aftermath, and he sort of pities her, but he still has some amount of feeling of resentment towards her, and he gets back at her still with Led Zeppelin 2, but he's also sort of coating it with sugar coating it with this sort of self-glorifying lyricism. Um, obviously you have a whole lot of love. You have what is and what should never be. You have Thank You, which is probably the best song on the album. You have the end, of course. You have the Lemon song. Um, you have And you have that bluesy one at the end that's not that good, but people who don't like Zeppelin tend to like that one, if anything. But I don't think it's the best one. It doesn't close out the album that great, but it's still the whole album is killer. Um, I'm probably missing something. Moby Dick's on here. I think Moby Dick's on here too. Next one up, Physical Graffiti S. My favorite double album of all time. If Led Zeppelin 2 is my favorite album of all time, I think Physical Graffiti is probably my favorite double album, which is slightly more embarrassing, but it's still. I mean, it's got Down by the Seaside, The Rover, In the Light, um, 10 Years Gone. What else can I say? The Crunge, I believe. Anyway, if you don't like it, those four songs plus maybe the Crunge or whatever I don't know, those four songs by themselves are better than so many Beatles albums. It's just it's asinine even to really draw lines in the sand because you know who's really who the real deal is. This one up next is a disappointment. This is their last album. It's the Coda, or it's Presence. I mean, Coda was a posthumous sort of release or whatever, but this one's called Presence. This one has like what T for One and Hot Dog, and I don't know. It was sort of weird. I would give it a B. Maybe I'll give it a C just because giving it a B confuses you. Like I think a lot of the later Sabbath albums fall in the B pretty squarely, but I wouldn't even call this album like a square album. This album is just sort of confusing. So I give it a C. It's got the same sort of quality as the Square Sabbath, Tony Martin, not even Tony Martin, but like worse than Tony Martin. Like the worst Sabbath albums you can think of would probably be. But this would be that, but it's just so weird that I have to demote it to like a C plus, just because of how convoluted the lyricism is, and really the music too. I mean, I like the instrumental stuff, but in here it just kind of all over the place. From what I recollect, it has no real cohesion as an album. Sort of a motley crew of medley and an awkward fanfare. Okay, Led Zeppelin 2. Sorry, this is 3. I know that. Led Zeppelin 3 is not their strongest album, but it does have excellent songs. It's probably the best. It's probably the worst of the best. That along with Houses of the Holy, which I would also say is an A, not an S. But Houses of the Holy, like Zeppelin 3, has a lot of miscellaneous sort of genres peppered in. Like Led Zeppelin 3 has like some folky acoustic stuff like Bronny or Stomp, I believe. It has um that's that one song, it's got Friends, I know. It's got that one song, Hats Off to Roy Harper. It's got these songs are kind of intriguing and trippy and sort of outlandish and foresty and somewhat mystical, but also just sort of somewhat janky. I can't really pin a lid on it, but it's yeah, it's they're all kind of fair weather songs. I don't listen to them to get juiced up, but I do find them kind of pleasant. They're not bad. Uh, in fact, what's that one song on Led Zeppelin 3 that is very tender and it's about some sort of heartbreak or death or so a girl dies. Folk rock. That's the word. It's a folk rock album in a lot of ways. That's the way. Beautiful, beautiful song. That's the way. So Led Zeppelin 3 is an easy A. I would say S, but I just think they're sort of mushy with the folk rock influences being sort of strewn onto it. Uh, Houses of the Holy is an entirely separate um, cavalcade of songs. no, not really folk rock, but I mean, you have Over the Hills and Far Away, which is probably the song that got me and that sold me on Led Zeppelin in the first place. So Houses of the Holy has its role. I think Houses of the Holy is actually a good what's it called? It's a good Baptism by Fire album. It's got Song Remains the Same, No Quarter, Maker. Um, I think the Crunge is the one. It's got the ocean and it's got Over the Hills and Far Away. It's not something else. And all those songs, they don't sound alike. They're all very generically, which means in terms of genre, there's very different in terms of genre. Uh, it's almost an experimental album. It's almost like a prog rock album. Maybe the first one you could really call prog rock that Zeppelin did, and possibly even the last. Uh, House of the Holy is maybe tries to be too intelligent, but I do think it is a scintillating example of the sort of the variety that they could sort of shit out if they had to. And if you're really trying to learn everything about Zeppelin but don't know where to start, House of the Holy is just a great baptism by fire because you can kind of get the extremes in one shot without having to sort of you know filter through all the other songs in the catalog or albums or however you do it in this day and age. I would imagine more songs than albums. Um, Next one up is In Through the Outdoor. In Through the Outdoor is a clever album. It's a B album. It's got some pretty cool songs. Like, what's the one? What's the one that All My Love and Fool in the Rain. Um, but for in the evening is okay. I mean, a lot of them are okay. It's a very sort of dainty, poignant album. It's not a mainstay album. It's not a it's not a heavy lifter, a hard hitter. It doesn't really, foot the bill so much, but it's sort of their last good album, and it is a good album. And if you don't think it's a good album, you're wrong. But I can't give it more than a B because it's like a B plus plus, maybe an A minus. Maybe I'll give it an A minus out of my sheer love for this band. Okay, up next, um, this one's S. This is Led Zeppelin 4. This is their highest selling album. Is it their best album? I think it is their most representative of what they accomplished as a band in terms of their folk rock merging with early heavy metal, merging with sort of gothic music, merging with sort of um, medieval sort of soundscapes. I think it kind of accomplished that sort of dungeon synth, rock and roll seesaw stage act that they were doing. That rock and roll dungeon synth seesaw stage act. That sort of that dialectic that synthesizes with two interweaving snakes, right? That make Led Zeppelin. I think this album typifies it. And you have their most well-known song. All right, where's Cash? It was Kashmir on just before I get into Led Zeppelin 4's track list. It was Kashmir was it on Physical Graffiti. Yeah. Okay. So the main song that you would need to know from Physical Graffiti is Kashmir. But the other four I mentioned were still banger. It's like you don't even need Kashmir for that out for Physical Graffiti to be one of the best albums of all time, if not, you know, very like a shining star example of the best album, and debatably one of them, debatably the best. I mean, anyway, without losing all the threads, Led Zeppelin 4. Let me just look up the track list for Led Zeppelin 4. I know it's got the Battle of Evermore, and it's got Black Dog, and it's got Misty Mountain Hop and Stairway to Heaven, is their most famous song probably ever, their most important song in some sense, although not the easiest one to listen to over and over again. Four Sticks is an incredible. Um, oh, I didn't realize Down by the Seaside was the same session. So that's really telling. Okay, Down by the Seaside is on uh, Physical Graffiti, but it was the same session as Led Zeppelin 4, which makes sense. They do sound um, interweavable. They sound like they have spiritually. Because Led Zeppelin 4, the thing to know about it was that Jimmy Page, the guitarist and producer for Zeppelin at this time, and the founder of Led Zeppelin, really, he bought an estate called Headley Grange, which is really just a large country house. And for whatever reason, it had some historical value, but he bought it and then he recorded the album in Headley Grange. And I think it was rumored to be haunted. But anyway, whether it was haunted or not, they recorded this whole album in there rather than doing it in like a major studio outfit recording. They're like, because for reasons I'm not quite sure about. I think he thought the acoustics obviously would be way more intimate. Doing it in an old building rather than in the middle of nowhere, rather than doing it in some like sexed up sort of bullshit project studio that had been like trampled on by everyone who came before them. So this was an original sort of recording studio situation, and the music does sound extremely intimate. And anything you would apparently from interviews, what I've heard is that anything that you would hear that they would play in Headley Grange would just like the whole you could the whole room would light up, just like you could play anything and it would sound way cooler and way more magical than it would in possibly mystical is a better word, way more mystical than it would anywhere else that they were used to recording. Now, why they stopped recording there, I'm not quite sure. It seemed like it was a pretty good idea, but they didn't keep recording there at this cottage. So, going to California, right? Rock and roll, of course, of course. When the levee breaks, oh, excellent. Memphis Minnie. Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense that she would have wrote the lyrics. Um, yeah, it's an amazing album, and that it had received overwhelming praise from critics, which is kind of crazy because when the critics ever give something overwhelming praise, but they uniformly like this album apparently. Um, I just don't understand why it hasn't been replicated. Yeah, Rhodes piano. Well, that's always good. I would like to purchase a Rhodes piano, but they're quite expensive, and they don't make them like they used to. You have to buy an old one. It makes it more expensive. I'm trying to figure out what happened to the recording studio. But anyway, all these songs are like amazing, and they're all sort of you can read the stories to how they came about. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. I kind of Fairport Conventions. The Battle of Evermore provides the only female voice to be heard on a Led Zeppelin recording, which is a duet between Sandy Denny from Fairport Convention and Robert Plant. And it was inspired by a reading about the Scottish Independence Wars. And it was written by Page on the mandolin. That might be my favorite song on Led Zeppelin 4, really, is the Battle of Evermore, because it represents the intrigue of Europeanism and which is European history. And history is delineated by military um, strife and accomplishment, the feats of the armies. And the Battle of Evermore is the only song by a major British rock band from this time that really kind of projected that sort of intrigue into music, popular music. And that's also, I think, it's sort of for me, it's the linchpin for this album. It's not, this album stands alone without the Battle of Evermore, but the Battle of Evermore is what makes this album feel like a British powerhouse album rather than like a an electric blues rock British album that was sort of really cool and ambitious. The Battle of Evermore kind of adds in a sort of European touch, a tinge of sort of old world culture to it. And I guess you could say that Stairway to Heaven does that as well, but Stairway to Heaven is so cryptic and unabashedly sort of um, like Christian. It takes away the historicism, and I guess the combination of that and Evermore, Stairway to Heaven and Evermore, make it a squarely European seeming album, which both round out the album to be something beyond just rock and roll at its finest, but it ends up being something kind of global in its ambition, more um, you know, European and American rather than or British and Anglophonic rather than just American or British or European or whatever it is. And there's something there's this majesty of the Imperium sort of evoked by it, but also an awareness for the country, which is sort of an enduring fancy in in British early British hard rock and heavy metal. Anyway, at 22 minutes and 45 seconds or so. I need to learn about this Sandy Denny person. I didn't. She had a lot of influence on this album. And the other thing to know about this album is the members of the band came up with symbols for themselves, which added to like the sort of the occult mysticism behind Led Zeppelin that was like sort of never really there, but was kind of building slowly. And then once they had added these symbols that they all customized for themselves, the band like sort of took on this aura of like divinity or godliness, which is all bullshit, but it was just that was part of the ultra aesthetic. And again, that really ties into the sort of deep European roots that Led Zeppelin 4 was sort of hitting into, and also physical graffiti was physical graffiti also ties into that too. So I think Led Zeppelin 4 and physical graffiti could kind of be seen as part one, part two of the distillation of what Led Zeppelin is. Whereas all the other albums are sort of sexed up blues rock, probably blues rock at its finest ever. Like, Since I've Been Loving You is Led Zeppelin 3. It's an amazing, amazing song, but it doesn't really feel like it's doing Britain a service. It feels like it's more just, playing to the charts. But when you have Led Zeppelin 4 and Physical Graffiti, it really starts to feel like music it has a providence or a pastoralism that had never really been done in this genre before. Not heavy metal at least. So that's their claim to fame. They kind of Zeppelin combined unusual styles and did so rather seamlessly, and maybe entirely seamlessly. And they perfected their own identity by merging styles in a way that's always been admired. but has never really been replicated. So that's my note. 25 minutes and the legacy of Led Zeppelin, the legend that never dies, the band that could combine the most unlikely genres, folk music and metal, and they did it. I don't. I mean, I guess there's some bands that tried and failed, like Uriah Heep. Uriah Heep does that same thing, but they don't really do it. They sort of jokingly do it. But Led Zeppelin actually did, and that's the crazy part. So that's why they're some of my heroes. Three of them that are still alive, and also John Bonham, who died in 1980. Some of my all-time favorite musical heroes and cultural. Good night and good luck. 26 minutes to top it off. Ciao.